You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Anderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Christopher Bollen.
At the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War. This audio clip is narrated by the one and only Luke Daniels. You're going to love this series. I love it so much. And Richard has been a great supporter and sponsor of the show, and we're going to show him some love. Listen to the audiobook excerpt. You're going to love it. And be sure to go to audible.com to purchase it. If you're not an Audible subscriber, you can get a free book just by signing up for a free trial at audibletrial.com/Hank. You get a 30-day free trial. You get the free book. If you decide to cancel your Audible subscription, you get to keep the free book, and it doesn't cost you a single penny. audibletrial.com/Hank, and listen after the show for the clip from Richard Fox. Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories, Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Do you have a favorite writer whose books are auto-buys for you? Wouldn't you love for readers to have you on their auto-buy list, then recommend your books to their friends and on social media? The good news is there are subtle things you can do, things that are nearly invisible to the reader, that will make your stories unputdownable. The Beyond 10 Days course from Victory Editing can help you get the most from your stories and help you build that relationship with readers through your writing. This course is full of awesome, and best of all, you don't have to fly across the country or put on pants. In this course, we'll focus on avoiding info dumps, dialogue mechanics, show versus tell in dialogue, carrying show versus tell forward to your narrative, deepening your point of view and strengthening your protagonist's voice, overwriting and how to avoid it. 10 hours of video content with text and audio downloads. Shine that diamond. Join me at the Beyond 10 Days course. Go to hankgarner.com and click the banner to sign up today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Christopher Bollen on the show with me today. He has a phenomenal new novel. It's called A Beautiful Crime, and it's out everywhere today when you're hearing this. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I think I'm one of the few people, maybe there are more out there, that always wanted to be a writer from very, very early on. It sort of went hand in hand with being a private investigator, which I really also wanted to be. Maybe second, third, fourth grade. I was this annoying kid that would ask my parents to hide things just so I could dress up as a detective and try to find them. But I always put that together with writing. I think it was the Agatha Christie complex that I had. But I sort of saw those as similar jobs or assignments, and so I fantasized, from really early on writing books and also solving murders.
You mentioned that Agatha Christie influence. Were you a bookish kid?
You know what? I mean, Agatha Christie really was sort of a gateway drug to literature for me.
For so many of us.
I know. I mean, she really deserves some sort of statue in most lending libraries because I mean, I was a semi-bookish kid in the sense that I loved to be alone in my room and I was kind of reserved and quiet. But and I did like to read. But then I think about fourth or fifth grade, I caught on to Agatha Christie and I didn't let go. I mean, I read, I think, all of the novels. I had a whole side of my room devoted to her. I had posters of the movies up in my room. I mean, it was really embarrassing because I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where most boys had, the Cincinnati Reds posters up. Even then, we didn't really respect the Bengals, but I had Death on the Nile and Murder on the Orient Express. So really, I was just obsessed with Agatha Christie.
That is awesome. Movies are not books. Sometimes they can be amazing as books are, but a couple of years ago when they did the remake of Murder on the Orient Express, I took my entire family and we went to see it, and I knew a million times over how the story was going to unfold, but I was still captivated by this story that's 100 years old, and she definitely deserves more credit than she seems to get these days.
Well, that's really what you're saying is such an interesting point, because I think a lot of people in literature look down on mystery and thriller in the very idea that if you know the ending, the book is ruined. So the book doesn't mean anything if you know how it works out. But I see, there are some books that are purely entertainment and the fun is the puzzle. Yeah. But just because something has a twist to it doesn't mean that it sort of lowers itself below the level of literature. And so, with Agatha Christie, there's so much intrigue, there's so much presence, there's so much of a time that she captures in those books, and they are also just so ingeniously clever. So,
yeah. Well, I know that your book has been labeled by folks as a literary thriller, the new book, A Beautiful Crime, which is out everywhere today. And when I first got the book, I didn't really know what to make of that because of the attitudes that you just mentioned and this. This war that seems to go on between what is literature and what is commercial fiction, and why one is lasting and the other is not. And sometimes just being entertained, being able to look at the world through a different set of eyes, solve a puzzle, sometimes that is just all that you need. And we can discuss the merits of one over the other all day long. But that doesn't mean that one is less important than the other.
It's so true. And I think, some of my favorite writers, I think you don't really know what to do with them. You don't really know where to put them in a library. You don't know what shelf or section they belong to. And I love those writers, but I think in the moment of publishing, it does create a lot of confusion. Is this for, people who like quick reads? Is this something that, you have to ponder? I want to do everything. I mean, I always feel like it's limiting to just think in one genre direction. So, but I do think that causes a lot of problems, and probably a lot of people would probably just, once you just like sort of stick in a lane and stay there and not kind of drive across the road swerving at anything. Which is what I tend to do while I'm writing.
Well, it happens, and that's okay. I think the marketplace is what it is, and we need to categorize books so that people know where to find what they like. I understand all of that, but yeah, it does make for convoluted shopping and discoverability, and I think we suffer a little bit from that in the greater scheme of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that I've taught writing at, universities, and I think that there's this fear even in classes of writing. Oh, you're writing a thriller. Well, you really shouldn't. You should be writing literature. I mean, why not do both? I mean, why can't you look at Patricia Highsmith, you look at Graham Greene, you look at these writers who are able to take sort of elements and plot points or styles and tics of the thriller and turn it into something amazing, and so it's really a shame to me that people see you can only do one or you can only do the other. I don't know, and then people always say that's changing, but I don't think it is fast enough. I think people really stick to their guns on on those, there's sort of a cement wall between entertainment or commercial fiction and the sort of high literary.
Right. Well, we can try to solve this problem all day long, but it is what it is at the moment. Let's get back to you for a minute. You grew up in Cincinnati, moved to New York to attend Columbia. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
What was your goal when you set out to New York? I know that you always wanted to be a writer. Was that at the fore of your mind, going to New York? I'm gonna go to Columbia and I'm gonna find my way to be a writer from there, or was there a different purpose for you?
Oh yeah, first of all, I was just dying to get to New York. Amongst my other obsessions, New York was one of them. So I was very hungry and excited to just get to the big city. Originally I wanted to be, of all things, a poet, which is, I think everyone goes through that stage. It's like a pneumonia. You just have to just get through it.
Until you realize that you need to earn money.
Yeah. And what's so weird is it was great to be 20 years old and obsessed with poetry, because I think it gives you a great ear for language, and also just everything is so sound based, and I still write to sound. Everything I write is about actually how it sounds as I read it. So for me, that was really great. But yeah, I came to New York. I went to Columbia. I took a lot of writing classes. I was an English major and took a lot of art classes, and I was just so excited to be in the city. And to a point that actually, after I graduated, I didn't really write fiction or poetry for about 10 years. I was sort of, as you said, sort of cobbling out a living, but having a great time not writing. It was a wonderful thing. I used to think, I used to have these teachers that would say, take time off and go explore the world. You have to have some life lessons. And for a very long time, I thought that they were just trying to sabotage the competition of next generation writers. Because I think, part of writing is just sitting down and doing it. But now that I'm a little older, I do realize I do keep using a lot of those early experiences when I was able to, jump off of a plane without any jet lag and move around in the world. I find I'm using that material now a lot. So there is something to be said for kind of packing in a lot of life when you're young.
I totally agree. And I know there's a lot of passion that comes with youth, and that is very important. And we need to not lose track of that. And we need to encourage people that are passionate. But there's balancing passion with experience will bring about a whole different kind of story. And that's something that can only be earned by walking it out.
That's right. That's true. And also I feel if I had started writing at 22, 23, I could have faked wisdom. I could have maybe tried to write like I knew what I was talking about life. I mean, I'm still sort of faking wisdom because, you never really get fully there. But, at 22, I really didn't know what I was talking about. So it would have just been an illusion, those kind of thoughts. So
one thing that I love about A Beautiful Crime, your new book, is how real the characters are, and how multidimensional they are, because we all are more than what people see on the surface. And that, you only get to those places with a character by really getting to know them and to realize that we're not just caricatures of ourselves. And that comes out a lot in novels where people are two-dimensional representations of a particular thought or a particular stereotype, whatever. What I love about A Beautiful Crime is that we see multi-dimensions to other people. And you've been the editor at large of Interview Magazine. We talked just a minute about this before we started recording. Having conversations with people and getting deeper than just a soundbite level in talking with people. How does that affect you as a writer of fiction now, this other work that you've been doing?
Well, first and foremost, just all those years of doing interviews, I learned so much about dialogue, and which I think, it's a big part of writing a book. for the most part, is just learning, having an ear for the way that people speak. And you can only get that by talking to people, having long conversations, really learning over the years how, people form their thoughts. And so that really helped me just on a stylistic level. But it was also, I didn't have the money to get an MFA once I left Columbia, and I had loans, and I went into magazine work because that was the closest thing that I could come to writing and being paid for it. I could have also gone to a publishing company, but the first people that opened the door to me were magazines, these sort of culture magazines. So talking to these amazing people I got to speak with so young. I mean, I was like 25, and I was showing up and interviewing Joan Didion and Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal, who was a real jerk. But he was, but in a kind of a great way. It was like getting an MFA, just talking to these, sort of these amazing, brilliant icons of writing who. So it felt like I was sitting in on a class, just hearing about, how they made their work. So for me, it was really instructive, and I enjoyed it too. I think. One of the wonderful things about a conversation is, people have this idea of a writer as alone in their room, cut off from the world. And I think writing is a lonely sport, but being able to step outside of my office and engage someone on their work, it's really, it pays its dividends to your own, because, you build off of what other people are talking about and what they've discovered. And so it was really enriching. I've run out of heroes, unfortunately. They're all dying.
Yeah, that happens. It happens. I'm
at an age, I think, where the heroes sort of drop dead, and now you're kind of stuck.
Right. One thing that I've noticed about having, long-form conversations with people is, especially as a writer, that it helps you to get outside of your own head sometimes, and not only maybe change the way you think about things, but the way that you look at things, just even on a surface level, horizons are broadened. Empathy really comes from having conversations with people. And I think that's what a lot of, the stereotype of the lonely introvert writer, there's kind of two pieces of classic writing advice. You need to read a lot. You need to write a lot. But I like to add a third to that, and you need to talk to people. Go figure out what makes other people tick or what they care about. And I think it will have a big impact on your writing.
I couldn't agree more. And, I think now we're in a certain time and place where there are so many voices and so many angry voices, and there's a lot of reason to be angry in the world. But it's starting to feel very much like everything is reading an angry op-ed. And so, you're feeling like everything is becoming a lecture on all sides, and a conversation utterly rips away that feeling, because you're actually having an exchange with someone, and opinions can change and shift, and you can share ideas. And so I think the answer to the sort of all feeling like you're being lectured to death by, good intentions, but sort of with a battering ram is what you're saying, like, open dialogue. It changes, it's so helpful.
For sure. From your time writing poetry, to then winding up in the magazine business and working out your chops as a writer, while earning a living, and you're finding success at that, and you're, maintaining, when does prose writing come back around for you?
It came around when I turned 30, and I thought I think I've had a midlife crisis since I was about 14. But I realized that I was never going. I mean, maybe I would have, but I realized at the time that I was never going to do it if I wasn't going to start now. And I just thought to myself, what, you can't. You've always wanted to write a book. You keep saying you're going to, and you're not doing it. So sit down and do it. And so it really was just that. It was a sort of I just felt like it was going to be one of those things that passed me by, like actually learning Italian or playing the piano, things I've already actually accepted that I won't be able to do in life. I didn't want writing novels to do that. And because I actually felt, I really felt that That's where I wanted to be. You get a lot of people who want to write a novel. It's an understandable dream. It's a beautiful idea. I think you don't get a lot of people that want to write novels, plural, because actually the hardest thing to do after you have the luck and success and hard work of doing the first one is writing another one. You kind of move on to the list like, no, now I'll parachute out of the sky, because that I haven't tried. But yeah, at 30, I sat down and it took me about 4 or 5 years to write the first book, because I was just I was figuring it out as one does on their own. And so the first novel, I think, suffered from, I think it's a great novel. I haven't read it since it came out, but I think it probably suffers from first novel syndrome, which is where you think that it'll be your only book, and so you put in every single thought you've ever had into it. Like you put in, it's like the kitchen sink novel. It's everything that you have possibly encountered, you're trying to shove into a plot. But I learned a lot from it.
Another thing that first novels do a lot, and probably because what you said, that a lot of people think this is going to be the only thing I ever write, is we tend to put a lot of ourselves in that, because we're using our writing to work out things in ourselves and what we think about things and our experiences. Was that true for your first book?
It wasn't. I have always had, one of the things I feel I'm lucky to have is a sort of a big imagination to be other people. So, in a sense, it was a really fun way for me not to be myself. Of course, it was set in New York. It was involved 30-year-olds. I mean, it might as well have had my name as every character. But there was a lot of not me in it on purpose. And I think in a way, because I'm not that in love with myself. I'm not that vain that I really want to see myself as my characters. So they were from very different economic systems. They were very different life situation. But yeah, I think it's very common, I think, now to sort of do a disguised memoir as your first book, because as we were saying before, when you're young, you're running on limited material, and there's something to be said for knowing a story really well. And that's the story well. In fact, I think I'm becoming more sort of veiled autobiographical as I write, instead of the other way around, which is strange.
Well, that first book was Lightning People, right?
Yeah.
And then you followed that up with Orient, and then Long Island, The Destroyers. And now your new book, A Beautiful Crime, and we've alluded to it a few times. This book, I love a good grifter story, and I think a lot of people do, and I don't know exactly what that says about me, that I love these kind of books. But we can explore that with our therapist later.
Right.
But how do you feel like maybe not necessarily the subject of your books, but the kind of spirit of what you do, how has that changed over these different projects that land you where you are with A Beautiful Crime?
Well, actually, what's interesting about after, the learning curve of the first novel, the reason I started to reach toward thriller or mystery components is because I really needed a structure. I needed a scaffolding on which to write. And so I love, going back to my childhood, I just loved the murder scaffolding. I love the thriller scaffolding. I love the arc of those books. I love the way they move. They're like sharks. And so I just kind of use that as a starting point, and it always gives you a direction to go. You know where you need to go you need to move forward. You need to, because it's very easy to write backward, and you end up writing flashbacks to death. And then, this just makes you write forward. But I'd also love, there's something about crime that just has always fascinated me, and it fascinates me about writing about, which is that it really breaks down societal, sort of ossified societal conditions, and that suddenly it throws everything into chaos. And when that happens, whether it's a murder or a grifter story, or someone missing or money at stake. Everything sort of falls up in the air and lands in a different way. And you can really explore like different classes and different people, and you can jump into different kinds of characters in their moment of crisis. And it's really, very exciting to write that way and not write about sort of these stiff, rigid systems where people are already sort of stuck in their place and don't move. So I'm just really attracted to that. And I too love a grifter story. Beautiful Crime, I wrote it because I wanted to write a grifter story. I think a lot of grifters, you kind of get this feeling, and probably rightfully so, that they're complete sociopaths. And they are, in a way. I mean, they're criminals, but I didn't want my characters for this book to be sociopaths. I actually wanted them to sort of be desperate, which is a great condition for a character to be, and in need of money, and sort of you kind of understand their motivations, even if you don't agree with them, or even if what they're doing is terribly dishonest and illegal, and you might not even like the characters. I wanted you to at least have some empathy for what they were trying to do. I think that I think it's actually kind of the opposite of Tom Ripley in a lot of ways. A character I'm fascinated with, we all are, and love, but he was a sociopath. I mean, he really, really was mentally ill. I don't think of my characters as necessarily sort of mentally ill. I'm not as fascinated by the sort of American Psycho kind of American character.
Yeah, well, when you reduce things down to purely evil or purely good, while can be a great story, there's no room for nuance in that, and there's no room for empathy, like you said, or the seeing how people's motivations are informed by life experience and things like that, and that becomes a pretty great story when you leave room for the changing tides of circumstance. Maybe
you're absolutely right. I think that the reason that people are really attracted to Tom Ripley and Patrick Bateman from Brett's book is that they're emblems. They're actually not real people. They're ideas, they're concepts, they're notions of America gone wrong. There's already like a built-in archetype to them. Whereas I'm really interested in creating a real fleshed out person, and real fleshed out people aren't archetypes. They can change. They make mistakes. Things go wrong. They learn. They grow. So it's a very different way of approaching a character. And yeah, so I think it's it's a different kind of book. It's a different kind of writing, I think.
Yeah. I love the huge ensemble cast in this book, and all of the characters are really engaging, in their roles and in their own ways. Pardon me just a second. Sorry about that. The tickle was coming on strong. But when I
was going to sing. No,
yeah, you missed your opportunity, Chris. When looking at the story here, there are three big characters that jump out at me, and those characters are Nick, Clay, and Venice, who kind of becomes a character all its own. Nick and Clay are the most likable, relatable grifters that I've ever encountered. And then Venice is this place that we romanticize and we think about in certain ways, and you realize that she, if we want to personify Venice, is not what we think it is. Where did these characters come from for you? First off, Nick and Clay, and then why Venice?
Venice that's the easiest of those questions, but I'll start with Nick and Clay. Nick, I felt like I was reading Daisy Miller by Henry James, which is about a young American girl who's very beautiful and very flirtatious, and very confident with herself, but very naive, who goes to Rome, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but like ends up sort of flirting with some guy at midnight in the Colosseum and ends up dying of a mosquito bite. But there's sort of this idea of this sort of American in Italy and flirting their way and sort of being this sort of naive, but in a way that Americans are really good at being, sort of taking over with all of their their way of being, and I'm guilty of that too. So I liked the idea of a grifter. If you're going to build a grifter, I didn't want them to be, it's not like James Bond. It's not like they have like all the right moves and know what they're doing. And, it's basically people who are really hard up, who are able to slightly, con their way by their own charm and innocence and sort of their ability to move through social scenes. And so he was sort of, I think, someone who sort of had to do that to survive. And I don't think it's necessarily malicious. I think he's sort of an innocent in a lot of ways. And it's actually the innocence in him that's perhaps most wicked. The fear, the scary thing about Nick, I think, might be that he actually has good intentions. And that's actually what's so dangerous. Clay's a bit smarter. Clay's sort of, he's born in New York, and he's someone who, he's probably more what you see in New York in people, which is like, an intelligence and an understanding of the way things work. And so, I just like the idea of them together sort of working a con. It's also much easier to do a con when there are two people. Cause you can, they can play different parts to it. And it was, and it was just fun to sort of build Venice and the story up in their eyes. So, but Venice was a city that I actually, when I graduated from Columbia, I did an internship at the Peggy Guggenheim, which is a museum in Venice, on the Grand Canal in Dorsoduro. And, I was the first time I had moved out of America. I was 23 and I moved to Venice, and I lived there for several months working at this amazing art museum. And I completely fell in love with the city, in a way that only at an age in your early 20s, and only the first time you live somewhere else in the world do you really fall in love with the place. And so lucky to live there. And it was just so incredibly beautiful. And I think like almost overnight, I went from like a sort of morose, I had dyed black hair at Columbia. I was sort of, really cerebral and like, really into sort of a really esoteric philosophy. And then within the first blast of Italian sunlight, I became very La Dolce Vita. And, just my whole worldview changed to like this beauty and happiness. And so it's really hard. It's really hard to be a brooding, melancholy character in Venice in the summers there. You might have better luck in winter, but it's such a fascinating place. And it also is very much like New York, too. I mean, it's a very similar town to New York in a lot of ways. A lot of surfaces, a lot of cultural, a lot of false fronts, a lot of, darkness around the edges to it, but really bright in the center. It's a really fascinating place. I just wanted to take all of that excitement and the weirdness and strangeness of it and sort of put these two characters into the maze of it, basically.
Well, there's an interesting subtext also about Venice that the things that endear it to all of us may be its, eventual undoing. That it's kind of in a precarious position, that all of our collective love of it, may be its undoing. Is that something that was conscious, to you in the writing of this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, to me, and I'm not above any of these lessons. And sometimes it's the case of the book being smarter than the writer. And you think you realize it as you write it. Like, that's so true. It's just, when we have been told for so long that Venice is about to collapse and it's sinking, and it's so historically important. It's so culturally important. It has these treasures that are not even movable like paintings in a museum. They're attached to the building. They are the buildings. And it's sinking, and we have to do something to help it and to save it. And yet we do nothing. So, and it's just, and so of course, like right now there's fires in Australia. There's always a disaster going on, and we're always a little too late to get there. And I think Venice just really sums up that sense of we as humans, we don't really save the things that matter to us until it's way too late. I don't know what it is about our psychology, but we just don't. I think we have a hard time believing something really will vanish. And it is, and the floods happened 2 months ago, and that's just another indication that these things are going to disappear. And so it was, there's something beautiful about that, something just on the verge of collapse, and also just something so sad that something's reaching its end.
A book like A Beautiful Crime could come across as very cerebral, as very calculating. It could be a very heavy book. But there's an interesting thing that you do throughout this book is you inject levity throughout the story, that kind of lets the reader off the hook a little bit and endears me to all of the characters in a new way that just looking into their psychology could do. How important is that to you when telling a story to inject humanity with levity?
It's so important. I really have trouble following a character or writing a character if I don't see their humanity. And again, that doesn't mean that they can't be a horrible person. In fact, I'm kind of interested in like the selfishness of people. I'm interested in the cruelty. I'm interested in the ways that they can be off. I'm not trying to write a book about great citizenship. I'm not a very good candidate to teach a civics class, probably. But I do want, I want there to be an understanding for the position they're in and the choices they make, even if you don't agree with them. And I just feel like it also just enriches the story so much when you see how someone got somewhere and where they are. And I think that maybe that's actually what separates whatever this thing called the literary is from something that might just be quick entertainment. Is that, are the characters just being used to further the plot, or is the plot being used to further these characters, and tell something about life and what humans are? So for me, those are really great. I probably do it too much, and I'm sorry that sometimes I feel like maybe the little pieces about their biography get in the way. Just like, open the door and find the thing, and stop talking about what happened. But I can't help it because I really enjoy kind of building these full lives and painting into them so much. So,
well, you brought it up, so there's something I've been dying to ask you, and that's this idea of plot versus character. And that's one thing I found really interesting about this book is because it is described as a literary thriller, and those two terms tend to lend themselves to two different types of writing. Literary really tends to be very character driven and based, and thriller tends to be very plot based. And you've done this really great melding of the two. But what does that look like from the writer's standpoint? And a great thriller a lot of times is planned out ahead of time. You're looking for where the twists and the turns are going to go. You're looking for what the ultimate end goal is and how do I write toward that. What was the planning for this novel like for you?
I used to say that I didn't want to ever write any sort of plan out, or I didn't want to do a blueprint of the book before I wrote it, because I feel like I always think like it's like building an IKEA shelf. Like you don't want to end up with an IKEA shelf at the end. You want something that's more magical than that, and so you should just sort of follow your instincts as you're writing, and that's what I've done. I'm now wondering if maybe I should write an outline. That maybe it would actually be a really interesting process. because a lot of times you're just sort of flying in the dark and you don't know where it's going to land and end up, and you hope that you're directing it towards some sort of exciting resolution. But I don't know all the time. I didn't know. And so it's really just like a mix, you know? You write a bit about the character, and then you want something to happen, or you want to move the plot forward, and then you move the plot forward to the point that you feel like you have, and then you kind of dive back into the character. So I'm sort of schizophrenic in that way. I'm sort of, want both at the same time. You sort of want to read poetry on a roller coaster or something. You want to like get into the character, and then you want also to feel the thrill of it. So it's a huge mess. It's a huge mess. And I have to tell you, I always worry that at the end of a book that I haven't done enough, and that it should be like, there should be another twist to it, or I need to, last surprise. But then you worry too that that's when things become really sort of cartoonish. I think you can be too clever, and it gets annoying. So I did actually had a few more twists at the end of this book, and I had to untwist them. It's like, I had to unbraid the pretzel, so it didn't feel too over the top.
You mentioned that first novel that it took you about 5 years to write. As you have put out more and more work, that production schedule has shrink down as most of us do. How do you feel like your creative process, your writing process has changed from that first book to where you are now?
I always get really confident when I finish a book, and I have a lot of beliefs that I'm going to write the next one even quicker, and it's going to be really fast and immediate. And then I sit down to do it, and I sort of have like a very quiet, nervous breakdown, realizing I don't know what I'm doing at all. And and so for me, it's always the same. It takes so long for me to write a first chapter, because I write chronologically. It's like a petri dish, the first chapter, and I keep starting it in different ways, and I keep playing around with everything about a character, the name, where they are, what they're doing, how to start it. And so that takes a long time. And then once that feels established, and then it starts to go more quickly, and then it sort of goes at a fast gallop. So it's always the same that way for me. I don't know. It's very hard to start. And then I kind of get into the sync of it and commit to it, and then it goes faster. I love to write a book a year. I think I'm an every 2 year kind of writer.
There's nothing that levels the playing field like the idea of a new novel, because no matter what you've done in the past, no matter how many copies you've sold, there's nothing like a blank page and having to completely start over from scratch.
And I'm like, I try to write a really amazing first line, which is a huge mistake, and it never ends up being the first line, because it always ends up getting edited out for something else in the end. But it's like, you want that perfect start. It's like the dive off of into the pool or something. But it's really tough. And I think that a lot of it is it's sort of like a duration. It's like running a marathon, but you just if you stop though, you're in real trouble. At least I am. I just have to keep going once I start, because there's so many reasons to stop writing a novel instantly.
and they will pop up every chance.
Oh God, yeah. I always think, like, if you really want to clean your apartment or your home, start writing a novel. You'll end up with like the cleanest home, because that's all you'll do instead of writing it.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad that you got your apartment clean, and we wound up with a beautiful crime. I love this book, Christopher. It's so fascinating on so many levels. It's available everywhere today. So when you're hearing this, while you're listening to us, you can click over to Amazon, get it, Kindle edition and read right now, or, order the hardcover. It's even out an audiobook today, right?
Yes, it is. I did not read it, so you'll never have to hear this voice again.
Oh man, Christopher, I love what you're doing. If people are just discovering you and all the great stuff that you're into, is there a place where they can connect with you?
Yeah, I have a website, ChristopherBollen.com. So there's a link to an email somewhere there. So please come.
Yep, and that's Bollen with 2 L's, right?
Yes, Bollen.
And we're going to put links to the new book and to your website in the show notes of this episode. Christopher, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Hank. It was so much fun.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War.
The near future. Humanity's only hope of survival entered the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come, then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the Sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed "Answer Me" over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. "When did I get this app?" he thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right, Doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to his ear, Mark stopped and looked around before deciding how to continue. Spiked ocotillo plants looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.